So BTC realized vol dropping by about 15 points from 45 to 30%. I can see that in the orange line stepping down here as some of those wilder swings kind of drop out of the sample. ETH, same story. That's down similar amount, down to 59, but the spread's still pretty big, right? The realized spread is still about 29 vols, which is high. Now, BTC front end vols was smashed lower by about 9 points. ETH was down by about 6, no, not quite as much this week. Carry shifting back to around positive 7 to 8 vols for both assets. You can see that in these blue bars here on the chart. OHLC charts, these kind of show the intraday high-low ranges of each trading day over the last week or so. You can see here on Bitcoin, these boundaries not being tested. So it means that the movement was not greater than the implied move that is implied by the implied vol in that asset. So short gamma players were not too stressed out, basically, as we weren't testing those boundaries on Bitcoin for the whole week. Hence why vols just got crushed, because big short gamma is working really well. And then on ETH, though, you see we did have a few tests of the boundary, right? So it did mean revert. So as long as you held on to your positions and you didn't stop out there, you did well being short gamma given the mean reversion. But we did test the boundary a couple of times last week in Ethereum. Now, if markets are going to go through, they do look like they've found a bit of a trading range. So if they are going to go through a period of consolidation, you know, I think the vols are saying, you know, you probably don't want to be bleeding too much theta right now. Okay, you probably want to wait to see a break. You either want to see a break below 98, and then, you know, vol picks up to the downside, or you want to see a break of that new all-time high that we marked, either let's say 2800, 2850 on ETH, or that 112k on Bitcoin. If that breaks, then vol probably reacts again, right? But in the near term, we may have found ourselves a trading range, and it's like you probably don't want to bleed too much theta whilst we're in that trading range. Okay, jumping over to the term structures, you can see here where we are. We're in a contango in Bitcoin, pretty steep contango, as you can see in that darker blue. And then Ethereum, apart from the very short end sub 1 week stuff, the curve is looking very slightly inverted here with a little peak there in the kind of 14-day area, basically. So and then you can see the vol changes. Front ends were smashed, as we said, but like, even the medium term stuff was down about 2 to 3 vols in Bitcoin and about 1 to 2 vols in Ethereum on the week, as you can see. All right, this is the time series, kind of shows how it evolved over time. A lot more choppy, the weekly stuff on Ethereum. You can see the red line oscillating quite wildly over the course of the week. Shows that Ethereum short-term vol was much more volatile, where, you know, it traded down to 64, then up to 74, down to 68, up to 74, chopping around like a madman, Ethereum vol. But the spot has been more volatile as well. Whereas you can see here, Bitcoin just kind of lost, went from like 50 to 40 and then kind of stayed pretty close to that level for the whole week, right? So quite a different dynamic there in the kind of vol between Bitcoin and Ethereum. Looking at Skew was priced in calls for both assets at the start of the week. Then it switched into puts. It got as deep as about 3 vols put Skew on Bitcoin. Now resides at about 1 vol put Skew in the front, and then the back end just slowly drifting its way lower. So it was all call Skew, still is all call Skew, but it's a bit cheaper than it was, only looking around about a vol point right now on Bitcoin. Ethereum, you can see that the short end Skew kind of tracking closer to the long end Skew, so the Skew curve a bit flatter on Ethereum, but then we did flip into puts, about 5 vols for puts at the weekend, as spot kind of traded a bit weaker, and now we're looking at about 2 vols for puts in the front there on ETH. So you can see the slope of the term structures, the Skew term structures, that is, you can see looks like this. So we've got -1, which is a put Skew on Bitcoin. Then we're looking at about a 0 to 1 vol across the curve now, which is quite a flat Skew now for Bitcoin. And then on ETH, we got that front end flipping from +2 to -2. But then we quickly, as we get up to July, we are very much back in call premium across the whole curve. And the long end calls still holding above a 2 vol call premium, as obviously, like I said, Ethereum starting to show some signs of outperformance and people willing to own a little bit of that upside and get participation in that catch-up trade if we get a catch-up trade later in the year in that kind of September, December time zone, which people are kind of, it looks like people are pricing in a little bit there. All right, so that's kind of what Skew's telling us. And then closing out on relative value, Ethereum, Bitcoin holding, like I said, above its downtrend resistance that it had previously. So we are looking at Ethereum trading a bit better than it was. Front end vol spread still higher on the week, up to like 27-ish, as realized remains very high at 29. And Ethereum vols held up better as Bitcoin vols got crushed in the front end. Back end vol spread moving up as well slightly. Looks pretty expensive to me. If I look at December trading at 17 vol spread, and I say to myself, there's very little gamma on December options. That's just a Vega trade. So as a relative value Vega trade, generally with these Vega trades, right, vol's a mean reverting thing. So as long as I'm not getting chopped up badly on the gamma and the realized, which is at like 30 right now, as long as in 6 months' time it's more normal at like 10, the realized spread, I'm counting on the idea that the Vega is going to reprice to about 10, because up here at 18, 17, 18, it looks really expensive, right? So I think there's a very good chance that that will mean revert over time, maybe over the summer. If it does depend on what spot does. I mean, if we go through a period of consolidation in crypto where both assets find a trading range and we kind of go nowhere for a couple of months, then I'm very confident that Vega spread's going to work in your favor if you're short Ethereum, long Bitcoin, right? So I think that's what you're looking for if you're doing that trade, right? Don't do that trade if you think crypto's going to break out and we're going to go to the moon, because chances are Ethereum's actually going to have its time in the sun and have a big move, and you might get burnt. If you think we're in a consolidation phase, but you don't really want to sell a load of gamma on like a 30 handle on Bitcoin because it looks crazy cheap, then you might say, actually, the best way for me to harvest a bit of theta, or best way to harvest a bit of vol premium, is to say, okay, well, if we're going to go through a period of not a lot going on, markets trading quite sideways, this risk premium that Ethereum is holding over Bitcoin could easily go from 17, 18 vols back towards 10 or 12 vols. So I could make a decent Vega P&L in that short if I park it in December, basically, right? So, and like I said, if there is a wild move on Bitcoin or Ethereum, well, Bitcoin you don't mind because you'd be long Bitcoin, but if there's a wild move on Ethereum, you don't have too much gamma in those December options, so it won't sting you too badly. That's the idea, okay? And then if we look at the relative value skew, the blue line popping a little bit, so just kind of normalizing, becoming a bit more uniform at about 1 vol higher call skew on Ethereum relative to Bitcoin across the curve going from July, basically. So that's the idea. So, again, the skew curve is telling us, okay, people are favoring Ethereum tail risk to the upside, and they're willing to pay a vol point above Bitcoin upside for that, basically, right? So that's what we've got there. All right, guys, that is it for the crypto vol update for this week. I'll catch you guys here next week. Cheers.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for making it to the end of the video. Remember, this is just a little taster of what we do at Options Insight. To get access to all our research, including my in-depth vol market insights, flows and positioning report, and my portfolio trades, and a whole lot more, you can sign up at options-insight.com. I'll see you soon.